It all started when the Duke went out for fun again a few months ago. He chose an unusual place, the slums, in an attempt to change things up a bit. Everyone who knew him is afraid that the guy will not get into trouble and not lose all that he has earned in his life, because every day he drinks and thereby destroys his credibility. Duke Uliki Kun Londonese, son of the late Crown Prince of Healden and only nephew of the present emperor. Having lost his parents, he hid from the gaze of his uncle, who had long claimed the throne. Uliki lived by pretending to be a madman and spent his nights in dubious company. This is roughly what his life has been like lately. Games, gambling, strangers, and of course his nocturnal way of life. He even got used to this environment, feels comfortable, and waits for the evening every time to come back to this place. Inside, the guy realizes that this is not what he should be doing, and the more he gets used to all this, the harder it will be to get out and get back all the things he is already slowly losing. These people around here have no manners. They don't strive for anything, they don't develop, and if he doesn't settle down, soon Uliki will be no different from them. In the meantime, some girl comes into this diner. She's obviously known to a lot of people here, and she asked me to bring her something stronger and quicker to her table. She has such a strong energy that everyone noticed her at once, and it's strange that she came here all alone. Some of the staff are as usual interested in her life, curious to know what's new with her, and it happens absolutely every night as soon as she's here. She doesn't look like a modest girl. This person is clearly engaged in some murky business. It's obvious from her behavior and how carefully she follows what she tells other people. And also, she usually earns money here by beating the weak in some competitions. But this time, the girl was warned that there was a strong opponent coming today, who, according to some, could easily take a few thousand from her. She immediately looked in his direction. This hasn't happened for a long time, and of course, excitement appeared instantly. In her eyes, you can see a glow that only gets brighter. She could see with the naked eye that this guy didn't look like someone who did this sort of thing, and could even be in places like this. She wondered who he was and what he was doing here. She was the only one who thought of it the whole time. The others didn't notice or even care about his very expensive suit. She immediately started to offer him a game, but he refused and started to leave. The girl didn't even think of leaving him alone. She was too interested in him. She thought that it was necessary to get to know him better and to find out how it happened that such an elegant young man was not in a mansion with his favorite girl, but here, where there was clearly a different level of environment. She'd been told he wouldn't be here long, and she'd said goodbye at once, even though she'd just arrived. She followed him very carefully. She tried to be inconspicuous. She wanted to see where he lived, but the Duke was very attentive and immediately realized that someone was following him. He did not even turn around and warned that if it happened, someone would regret it very much. Habitually started saying that he wasn't going to give money, that he didn't have time and had a lot of things to do, and she resented him for being so rude and even demanded an apology. Ulitsky was already angry. He ordered her to leave immediately, for he had no time for crazy women who followed strangers at night. She really looks like a fraud, with some straw on her clothes, and she doesn't inspire any trust. It's obvious to him that she's some kind of fraud who wants his money. When suddenly some man shows up, but she doesn't notice it right away. He started to take a swing at her, reminded her how he'd promised to find her, and warned her that she wasn't going anywhere from him now. It's unclear if she pretended not to know him, or if she really has no idea who he is, or what he wants from her. The man introduces himself. He's Josh from the hardware store, and it turns out he's been looking for her for over a month. You'd think she stole something from him, owed him money, or broke something at the store. But no, he demands that she return his wife, to which she replies that she has no one, and maybe he has her confused with someone else. It turns out that she still deceives him, and even once helped his wife, but took her for a good purpose, because she was always walking with bruises and complaining about her husband, with whom it is impossible to live normally. The Duke somehow automatically started to be on the girl's side. He's even ready to protect her, because that madman with the knife, and obviously a little crazy. He's threatening. He's looking too ominous, and leaving her here alone wouldn't be right. The Duke isn't really interested in dealing with the situation. If it wasn't for that knife, he would have gone home a long time ago, but he feels compelled to be around for whatever reason. That madman is already taking a swing at her. He's out of control, and of course, the guy's already decided to intervene. This could go on no longer. He asked the girl to hide behind his back, and he himself would try to calm him down. But she wouldn't listen to him, used to defending herself on her own, and now she was aiming right at his face. She's been on him ever since. She's totally fearless, not like other girls. It turns out they were almost simultaneously interested in each other, so much so that it turned into something more. The boy found out that her name was Maddie, which became his favorite name, though he had originally called her a thief and saw nothing attractive in her at all. She ended up hitting him not in the face, but in the leg, thus pitying him and letting him know that next time she would aim much higher and would not be so kind anymore. Maddie dislikes her temper very much. Because of it, she has at one time forgiven those she should not have forgiven, as she does now. She wants to learn how to be a little tougher, and stop being so soft. She even has a little dream of getting into the body of a male villain to find out what it's like to become stronger, more ruthless, and not afraid to hurt someone. Everything was more or less normal, when suddenly, the Duke abruptly began to withdraw, and when she herself proposed to go out, he took and refused, started grabbing his head, asked for silence, and even pushed her away the moment she apologized for her behavior. It's like he's become a different person. Just now, he was crazy about her, admired her, and now he's running away. Although just now there was an opportunity to go on a date, and he ruined it all by himself. Has it really come to the realization that something needs to change, although it seems to be the other way around? He even asked to get out of here, and under no circumstances, do not follow him. The thing is that in secular society, there is an unspoken rule to never show that someone likes someone, and until the last moment to pretend as if people do not care about each other. But this is a bit of a different situation, and it is not clear what is happening to him yet. The girl saw the way he was looking at her. It was the first time she'd taken the initiative, and then this, out of the blue. Meanwhile, the Duke is on his way home. He tries to walk fast, but he is stopped by horrible memories. When he was very young and saw how bad his parents were, the kid even slipped a few times, being so inattentive, even though there wasn't much left to go on. He remembers his mom saying the same thing all the time. She was almost unconscious and saying her baby has to survive. He has to survive. He has to survive. He has to survive no matter what happens. She was panting and coughing all the time, the little Yuliki one holding her hand, but not quite understanding why she felt so badly for him. Duke brings that phrase up every time he's under stress, though he has no idea what it has to do with it. I guess when he heard the sound of the gunshot, he remembered his mom's words and somehow instinctively started to run away. There's no other explanation for it, which is probably why he pushed the girl away, even though he didn't want to do it. If Maddie had only known the consequences of that shot, she probably wouldn't have done it and would have resolved the conflict some other way. And as for his father, many years ago, a man went missing, and 3 months later surfaced in a lake. He was an unrecognizable, decomposed creature. Some thought it. Bud did it to himself, but there was no reason for it. They had a great family, at least most of the time. The guy even now hadn't figured out the cause of the illness that had killed his mom, much less the cause of his father's disappearance. He had his suspicions that it wasn't an accident, but he didn't have the time to look into it all. Of course, among their acquaintances, there were many envious people who could theoretically be involved in this situation. It was so unfair that the man who set it all up made sure that the little child Julicia was blamed for it all, and in the end, the father's throne was taken by Laphadite paragon Rondines. Immediately after the crown prince's death, his son was sure that he could be the next one, and that's why he began to be so careful about his life and safety. It was only now becoming clear to him what his mom was talking about and why she was so worried about his life. Apparently, the woman knew something and just wanted to warn him. So the guy pretended to be crazy and pretended not to be interested in politics, so that no one would see him as a competitor to be gotten rid of. And so began a new life in the slums, which has nothing in common with the way he lived before. Immediately after the throne went to his uncle, they began to see him very seldom, the Duke being afraid to be seen by him, much less to speak of the inheritance. Meanwhile, a guy is walking down the street, not touching anyone, and then some man attacks him, covers his face with a bag, doesn't let him breathe, pushes him to the ground, and tells him not to resist, or he'll make things worse. This villain wasn't alone. There were at least two of them. He knew it immediately from the voices and conversation, but he didn't recognize anyone else. Yuliki thought that was the end of it. He didn't even fight back. But would he just give up, and that would be the end of it? Just as unfair as his parents had been. At some point, he miraculously managed to get the sack off of him and saw Maddie appear. Though after all he'd said to her, the guy never thought she'd help him out. And anyway, he'd already gone far enough away that she wouldn't have heard him. But a real miracle had happened, and it seemed it wasn't as bad as he'd thought it would be. The girl handles these villains so skillfully, she doesn't care who they are, where they come from, who they work for, what they do it for. So brave she is. It turns out that her kindness won out again. Any other person in her shoes wouldn't even react to something like this and would have gone about their business. But she came to help, and it's unbelievable. One of them had not had enough of her blows. He wanted something more. He dared to grab her by her clothes and thought he would beat her. But he just doesn't know who he's messing with, instantly regretting it and realizing he'd better take the opportunity and run somewhere far away. But it's too late now. She gave him a good beating, left at least a couple of bruises that after that, you don't even want to imagine what's going to happen to his face in a few hours. The Duke had been sitting in one place watching the whole time, as she didn't even want to interfere. She was doing quite well on her own. He has no words. The guy doesn't know how to react to this, although it wouldn't hurt to apologize and thank him first. Really wondering what she's helping him for. Is she really that interested in him that she stepped on his pride? Which has never happened before. He didn't even want to fight with her anymore. Now he wouldn't ask her to go anywhere, and he wouldn't push her, because he'd just seen what could happen in return. She's already approaching him, looking down on him, and not saying anything, which only makes him more nervous and more nervous. A look so enigmatic that he couldn't tell what she was thinking, or whether he had anything to fear. And then her real self appeared very suddenly. The girl remembered that those villains must have their purses with them, and thought, why not take them away? She put one of the bags in his hands, and didn't even bother to take every last penny for herself, as business as usual. And also, what was very unexpected, back when they were in the pub, the girl somehow managed to steal his brooch unnoticed, and now she returns it and laughs, as if it was a joke, and she didn't mean to take it back. Duke doesn't understand how this could have happened. After all, he's usually very attentive, and would definitely notice if she touched him, much less took anything away from him. Now you're gonna have to work on your attention span. Meanwhile, Maddie's trying to cheer him up, and he's not even responding. And then something interesting happened. Maddie is not the kind of person who likes all this intrigue and innuendo. She admitted right away that since it was time for her to leave, she wanted to make arrangements to see you again, and said she liked him at first sight. She couldn't pass up such a handsome man. But if it wasn't mutual, she promised not to take offense. Yuliki was so confused that he didn't even say anything back, and after she saved him, it was a bit rude of him to do so. The girl thought that he just didn't want to upset her, realized that they were not on their way, and started to leave, as suddenly, at the very last moment, he stops her, takes her hand, and asks her to talk some more. And the thing is, he just needs a strong man to help him make the Emperor lose interest in him. She looked very intently into his eyes, trying to find a catch, but still inclined to agree after all. Maybe their acquaintance was not accidental. They were given to each other by fate, and something suggests that they are not bad for each other. And something interesting can come out of this. A very awkward silence ensued. Maddie gave him a lesson and began to react in no way to his suggestion, just as he had done. She even pretended he wasn't interested in talking to him, started walking away again, and asked him to learn how to talk to girls first before counting on anything else. And then she quickly calmed down and said that she really liked guys like that. It was rare that someone could treat her so boldly. He had her hooked again. And also, the girl decided to surprise him again and told the fact that few people know about, namely that he is a duke, and that she realized it literally at first sight and did not doubt it. Meanwhile, though he hasn't said what he wants from her, the girl understands and says she has the floor, because now that he's stopped her, he needs her, and then gave him advice not to be so arrogant, because she might just say no and not even listen to him. Eventually, they somehow agreed to be allies. She was just short of a switch, and here they are going somewhere, jumping over different buildings, though they could have gone the regular way. But Madai was so used to it and didn't even think of moving in the usual way. She likes to see the city from unusual angles, and in general, she prefers to think and look at life in a different way than most people. As she leads him somewhere, the Duke has no idea what's going to happen next, as he hasn't even heard a clear answer as to whether she's going to help him or not, and she hasn't really heard what he wants from her. Turns out she brought him to her office, wants to discuss things in the comfort of her own office, just outside. He thought she was leading him into some kind of trap, some kind of scheme. But no, Maddie just wants to discuss the matter properly, without rushing, in a normal atmosphere. Also, she called him her client for some reason, though he was a little embarrassed by it. The guy didn't ask anything about it. And as soon as he sits down at the table, counseling will begin. Although what counseling has to do with him needing help is unclear. Anyway, he's just following her lead and trying to do his best not to piss her off, and of course, get what he wants. The girl already starts to tell him what can be useful to him, already asks him what he is specifically interested in, but before he concludes any contract with her, he wanted to be clear about something. He's not going to work with anyone who might be a spy or an accomplice of his enemy. She'll have to somehow order that she doesn't work for anyone, that she's on her own and can be trusted. Mahdi is ready to pass any checks, and if it turns out that she is a spy, the girl does not mind to promise, and even make a contract that will owe a huge amount of money or remain his servant for the rest of his life. He thought that was enough. They'll make a contract later, but now it's time to talk about what he needs. At the very last moment, when they were ready to discuss everything, he asked her the last question that confused him the most, namely, if she wasn't a spy, then why had she started spying on him? The girl replied that it was very simple. He was just too handsome, and she couldn't let him go so easily. It was a little different than what he was expecting to hear, but he believed it anyway. He remembers her saying it before, but for some reason, he didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just an excuse. But as it turned out, Maddie was really in love with him. In the end, she learns that the only thing she has to do is to protect him and make sure that the Duke is not harmed by the Emperor. In addition to that, there will be some other cases. But this is not the main thing, and it seemed easy for her, especially since he pays money for it, and before she was doing it just for fun. He can't believe that a girl could be interested in doing something like that. He will check her out, but without her knowing about it. It turns out she's happy to take any job as long as it pays, and he's fine with that too. At one point, he asks her and what family she's from. Maybe she has aristocratic relatives, to which she laughed out loud, and decided to show something that would make it clear that there were no aristocrats in her family. She is such a sad situation that she doesn't even know her parents. They abandoned her at a young age, so she had to learn how to defend herself and survive without support from anyone. She wasn't very good at making money, and since he's offering to do something she loves, where there's danger and paying money for it, she promises to do anything as long as he doesn't ask someone else to do it for her. And then he has a brilliant idea. It seems to him that if people see a girl near him, they will realize that she is his assistant and probably protects him from someone, given his situation. So it is necessary to make sure that she is near him, does not arouse any suspicion. He takes her hand, offers to change the contract a bit. She doesn't need a guard anymore. She needs another person, if she's okay with that, of course. Mahdi looked at him with a smile, as if she understood everything, though in fact, she absolutely did not. The Duke proposes marriage to her, because if she's around as his wife, no one will ever think that this marriage isn't real, and that she's actually walking around to protect him. And then the smile from her face abruptly disappears. The girl thought she just heard it, but he really wants to make her his wife. You'd think that since she called him handsome and said she liked him, she'd say yes right away. But it didn't work out that way. Mahdi asked him to step away and hinted that she didn't do that kind of thing. And in general, she planned to marry for love only, like all normal people do. But he's so persistent, and he even looks at her with those eyes like he's not gonna let her go anywhere, whether she likes it or not. She starts lashing out, wants to get out and run away from the office, says that if he thinks money can buy everything, he's very wrong, and she's not what he thinks she is. Suddenly, the phrase, 100 million, was uttered, and Madai was no longer trying so hard to get away from him. She stopped and asked if she had heard her. Just now, this man was telling him that money can't buy everything, and then she changed her mind so quickly and started contradicting herself. Right after that, the guy says that he was a bit wrong. The girl already thought that the Duke changed his mind to pay so much, and he doesn't have that much money. But he explained that he is now offering me $1 million, but $1 billion to be more precise. After 3 years of marriage, she will get that money. And if she wants to leave the side, he will additionally prepare her money for everything she will need. And maybe if he's completely happy with everything she's done and how she's done her job, he'll provide for her for the rest of her life. She immediately screamed at the whole office. Of course she agreed and is already starting to call him her favorite, for whom she would do anything. Immediately afterwards offered to deal with the conditions, and she had not a few, and some of them she had just made up. First, the wedding should be as luxurious as possible. Second, in public, to behave as much as possible in love, although he does not really like this word. But he agreed, there is no choice already. Third, at least a couple of times a week to please her with a bouquet of flowers. Give other gifts. Fourth, they should definitely sleep in separate rooms, and if there are no strangers around, avoid physical contact. Sixth, this contract is only valid if both he and she survive for 3 years, so that's kind of it. He didn't really like the terms, but since she's asking for it, he doesn't really have much of a choice. The girl explains it by the fact that since he will benefit from this marriage, she should also feel comfortable during this time. Receive gifts. Although she will get a lot of money, even more than her job is worth. He suddenly has one question. With her abilities, she could be a personal guard for an aristocrat. So why is she living in the slums without a proper job? To which she says she doesn't even know. Probably because she just doesn't like to be held down. In the meantime, they had already had their first conflict. He reprimanded her about her manners, and she reminded him that he had asked her for help and knew from the beginning that she had never studied anywhere and could not be brought up with such a background, which she had already told him about. It's strange that he's making such a claim, because he knew who he was going to, and if he wasn't happy with something, she reminded him that he could break up with her right now and go to someone else. And to piss him off more, she started calling him her favorite, like she was trying to smooth things over, but no, she just didn't know. But Duke has always been a man who hates all those words like favorite, sweetheart, darling, and all that sort of thing. Now she's found out about it and is using those words as punishment for some nasty remarks on his part. Meanwhile, they had already gone outside for a special scene. He had bought her a bouquet of flowers. He wanted to give them to her on the street, but when he was in the store, he lost Maddie, although they had agreed to meet on this very corner. The guy first thought she'd run away and changed her mind about helping him. Those were his first thoughts, but it wasn't that bad. He's standing there, looking around, trying to find her, when all of a sudden, "Honey, why are you standing there? I've been looking all over for you." Just when they agreed not to address each other that way, she went against the rules, and now she's walking around all happy to see her special someone with flowers. Talking very loud on purpose, her eyes light up, all eyes on her. Mari has quickly gotten into character, and she's doing very well at it. The Duke was already displeased. He was disgusted to hear those words just in private, and here she is saying it in front of everyone. The girl made it look as if they had agreed that she would come to visit him, but he had come, and she was very happy about it. Maddie loudly clarified that he usually always came himself, always giving flowers, though from the outside it looked like she was going a little overboard. Strangely enough, it was at that moment that he remembered how she had confessed her love to him, and thought that maybe it wasn't acting at all, but the real words she was hiding under the guise of a role. The young man gives her the bouquet. He doesn't behave very confidently, although she didn't expect more from him. He has to take the initiative, and she doesn't mind. Turns out she's never gotten flowers this big and fresh. All her favorite shades are here. Now this day has become one of the best in recent memory. Her eyes sparkled even earlier. And it's hard to imagine how she feels about him after that, because surely it's even more pleasant to play this role now. She also started saying many words of thanks to him, though most of them were sincere and not just to be heard by people. The Duke was so embarrassed that his whole face turned red. He had no idea that she would be so good at her task. Now the rumors that he had a girlfriend would spread in a blink of an eye. He feels like it's too much. His heart is about to jump out. It's a real emotional disaster. He wasn't prepared for it and didn't think it would be so realistic, and decided to try to keep it together, after all. One of them has to do it, after all. I had to ask the girl not to overreact, after all, it's just a game. One more nice word he just can't take. The Duke was sure he'd told her, she'd hear it, and he wouldn't have to blush anymore. But he didn't. She used his words again for plausibility, smiled back, and reacted in a way that would definitely make his heart jump out at the very least. Maddie smiled sweetly and asked what he was saying, since there were people around, and supposedly he had embarrassed her a lot with something. He literally has no patience. She, on the one hand, helps and does everything exactly as they agreed. But on the other hand, the Duke is not used to show his private life so openly. The girl is just taking advantage of this great opportunity. She's always wanted to be in this place, and now she has a chance to at least play such a role. She felt a little sorry for Yulikyu's slight discomfort, but I'm sure he'll thank her for it later, and more than once. The guy thought that since they'd already embarrassed themselves, as he thought, they should finish the job, so they wouldn't have to do it again later. He calmed down a bit, warned that he was about to say something important, which meant the fun part was about to begin. Maddie never thought he'd take the lead and not have to do everything himself. The Duke takes her hand, does it very gently, though his mind and body resist. But he has already made up his mind, and it is too late to retreat. He proposes to her very loudly, asking her to marry him, looking madly in love and shy eyes. He didn't even have to pretend. He was already nervous, and it looked very natural. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not. But there were a lot more people on the street. And in the meantime, Juliky repeated his words and asked to be near her, because he didn't need anything else, and in return, he would make her the happiest girl in the world. After such words, even the other guys let out a tear. Not to mention the women who dreamed their whole life to hear such a thing. Everyone started congratulating them, shouting all over the street that Maddie deserved it, even though she hadn't even said anything back and hadn't agreed to his proposal yet. Up to this point, it was safe to say that she would answer him in the second and cry with joy. But the girl is silent and even took her hand away from him. She looks kind of scared, and even the Duke has no idea why so. Maddie apologized to him and started to run off somewhere, though she could have just agreed. But something didn't go according to plan. They hadn't planned for such a development, and since Juliky wasn't going to embarrass himself again, he caught up with her and tried to grab her by the arm. Then he remembered that she was someone who could handle two men with one fist punch and didn't squeeze her hand too tightly. Either way, until she explained something to him, he's not going to get away from her or let her go. At least he'll try to. Maddie said it's very simple. She just doesn't want to marry him. And after they've already agreed on everything and made a contract, it sounds too weird. The guy doesn't understand what's going on. First, she's happy to look in her direction and is crazy about being around her. And then suddenly, she's getting married. He's already starting to get angry, warning me that it's better to tell the truth now than to fight later and waste time on it. It turns out the whole problem is that she's afraid of something. Everyone can say she just latched onto him because he's a duke, especially since she wouldn't believe there could be sincerity in such a relationship either. Either they'll come up with something and people will believe that he's really in love with her and it's not her initiative, or it won't happen and she won't be able to help him. The girl just didn't think about it beforehand. She's sorry she disappointed him and doesn't even know how to fix the situation now. He just had no choice. When people caught up with them again, he repeated all the same words, and on purpose so people wouldn't think she was the one who had charmed him, he started reminiscing about how they had first met and how he had fallen in love with her at first sight. He looks at her carefully, sees that Maddie doesn't seem to be planning to run away, and decides to continue. He wants to kiss her, and if he does it on his own initiative, it will be seen that it's not her who's crazy about him, but him as she wanted him to be. The girl could not think that a man who was far from romance and did not recognize any such thing in his life would be capable of a kiss, and in such a public place too. What surprises her most is the fact that he's kissing a girl he doesn't love. It's impossible to imagine how hard it is for him to compromise his principles. They started to congratulate them again. People are happy, and all of them, without exception, no one has an ounce of envy, and that is insanely important. Things are heating up. But so far, nothing bad is happening. People are happy. They clearly believe in the relationship, and Madi is just screwing herself up. It's like everything inside of her is not as colorful as it is in reality, and it's a shame because she could have just relaxed and not worried about anything. And that's where it gets interesting. It's not clear where he got the ring, but he pulled it out and said that since he met her, his life has changed completely, and Maddie has become the meaning of his life. Now she won't run away from him. No girl can resist a ring from such a handsome duke. They hugged at the end. It looked beautiful. And if he hadn't caught up with her, none of this would have happened, and they would have had to start all over again. Not even half a day later, the newspapers are full of information. Duke Julikian is in love with a girl from the slums. Then the next news, a sensation. The Duke proposed to an unknown girl, and the question, what after that awaits the empire? Those who have not seen all this in life, watching the news like some kind of serial. The story of the Duke and the girl has spread all over the country. Everyone starts buying up newspapers a few at a time to share with friends. And some people started reading the news for the first time at all because of it. Aristocrats began to call this relationship romance without boundaries, meaning that love exists regardless of status. And after all, it is usually customary to marry or marry only those who are about the same title or status. After all those rumors spread like wildfire, the young couple had already made their way to the ducal mansion. While the common people can't get excited about the news, some in the ducal household can't find a place to sit, so unhappy are they with it. The conversations here are very different from the rest of the world. There are few people here who are excited and will likely try to even interfere. The cook in this house decided he had a right to pry into the Duke's private life, and even started ruining the food that was meant for Madame. He put a huge handful of salt in it, and that's just a little bit of what he's capable of. One of the aides came over and explained that since the Duke had decided so, they should just accept the fact, especially since it was his private life, which was none of their business. Was there really not a single person in this house who understood this? The lovers are already sitting at the same table. Dinner has been brought for them, and among the dishes is that very salty meat, which will not be left without attention. Suddenly, she starts feeding him, cuts a piece off her plate, and says she's been wanting to do this for a long time, which means he's about to taste this oversalted piece and realize that his girlfriend is not welcome by at least one cook. All the helpers know what the cook did. They're already holding their breath, and the girl knows she's about to teach him a lesson without knowing it. The cook mentally thinks, "Sir, please don't do that. Don't eat that meat, I beg you, not that." In the meantime, he is already tasting this piece, just touched it with his tongue, immediately felt a huge amount of salt, but he decided not to tell her about it and immediately offered to swap portions. He immediately wanted to drink water, but the Duke held back, just so she wouldn't suspect anything. Madi might realize that his staff wasn't happy with her, and now the guy would have to do everything so that she wouldn't realize anything, and no one would dare to spoil her mood. Had to explain that his meat just seems to be fried more than usual, and he's a very picky eater, so would like to ask to switch plates. Maddie didn't suspect a thing, and the Duke's gaze was already slightly directed at the cook, who would be held accountable for this act very soon. All the time, they were chatting sweetly at the table, though the boys didn't notice it. But the girl understood everything. A huge mountain of salt on the potatoes was simply impossible not to notice. She looked at the man and thought she'd deal with him, but for now she pretended to be okay. She was offended. Could the cook seriously think that she didn't know how much salt to put in a portion of food, and that so much was too much? After dinner, everyone has gone about their business. The man has come to some warehouse to replenish the food stock in the kitchen and has no idea that there is a surprise waiting for him here. But that's not all. The second he wanted to put a drop of poison in the food that will be cooked for breakfast tomorrow, Maddie grabs him by his clothes, and now she has one more reason to punish the villain. She had no idea she'd be so hated here. These people just don't know who they're dealing with or what to expect from her yet. At a moment when he didn't yet know who had grabbed his clothes, she said hello in a very gruff voice and asked if he wanted to explain something or maybe apologize. Hours had passed. It was night outside, and since the cook had been caught by the new mistress, he had not been able to leave that warehouse. The girl tied him up, warned him that he would not forgive her. She was not so soft as to turn a blind eye, and told him that if he wanted to become her enemy, she could only wish him good luck. The man is starting to come to his senses. He's been unconscious for a few hours, and she has a little surprise for him again. What's in his mouth now is his own poison that he wanted to slip her for breakfast tomorrow morning. She just told him to try not to drool because the wetter the tissue gets, the faster I'll leak into his stomach. So there you go. Maddie wasn't used to letting her enemies go so quickly. She talked to him for a very long time, told him about some of the cases, or rather the most violent ones, when someone wanted to hurt her. Girl a few times and asked if he was ever going to do what he did today again. But he's silent, and that says it all. The man doesn't hide how he really feels about her, but Maddie isn't intimidated by that. She figured, since he wants to be quiet, she might as well leave him here for a while. Hardly anyone goes into this warehouse except him, so he won't be found here soon. And if he is, he'll have suffocated or something else will happen. She said a nice goodbye to him, wishing him well, though she usually never leaves daredevils like this alive. I wonder if he has already regretted his action or not. Although it doesn't matter. Sooner or later, he will have to apologize after all. The door slammed shut, and he felt bad. And it would have been easier to apologize, even if she wouldn't have listened to him. It turns out this man is not only bad for the new mistress, he has long been collaborating with the Duke's main enemy and has been trying to carefully and slowly poison his master for months now. In the end, he himself suffered for his misdeeds, and the girl does not yet know that he wanted to send not only her, but the Duke as well. Some time passes, the door opens, the Duke bursts in, and Maddie stops him. She couldn't help herself. She told him what she did to that cook. But the reason why she did so was as yet unknown to him. Maddie realized that time was short, and before he released the cook, told him how it had been. It so happened that although the girl did not know that the poison was in each of their plates, she said that the cook wanted to poison him too, but only to punish him, without even realizing that this was the case. Strangely, the guy reacted very calmly to it and even asked how you could keep a person tied up like that, and also said that it was Miley who had been working for their family for over a decade and that he would never do such a thing. And then the most interesting thing began. The Duke thought someone would tell him, started asking if the cook really wanted to poison them, and surprisingly, the cook cried and started apologizing profusely and told how someone offered him money and said that if the Duke got poisoned, they would give him even more. The man started to justify that he had children and needed money urgently and promised that it would never happen again. Ever. Instead of punishing him more, the Duke asks for an antidote and thinks it's not the cook's fault, it's his fault for not watching his servants. The villain at this point thought how dare he do this to such a kind man, and if he was destined to die anyway, he should help the Duke escape and tell him who was behind all this. He said very loudly, "Montanando backtack," and the Duke knows the man very well, and had no doubt it was even he. Ulitki asked him to stop talking. It would only make him worse, but in the meantime, he would try to find a way to give him the antidote, and once everything was in order, he would even allow him to leave these lands for anywhere in the world. The girl had never thought that the Duke was such a kind man. She doesn't know how she herself would have acted in his place, but clearly far from it. Meanwhile, some time had elapsed, and during the conversation, the girl had learned that the Count Montanando was the Duke's own uncle, of whom he had told her. She's ready to go to him and punish him for everything he's done wrong. It's still unclear where they're going so late, where they're going. The girl doesn't know the area, so she doesn't even look around. It doesn't make any sense at all. While they had time, he decided to confess that he was grateful, because it turns out she had saved him today and had done a fine job of it. Suddenly, the girl had a question, why he did not have a personal guard. Because in his position, it would be very logical and would not have to marry her. To which he replied that he used to have guards, but they all either died or ran away, and even now when he puts in a request for guards, no one agrees or responds. He's got some problems with it. The guy can offer anyone a lot of money, but 1 out of 10 people will take it, and that's unlikely. Just when he thought that maybe she too would end up scared of doom and run away before 3 months, Maddie says she's going to be his first guard that's not going anywhere. It was so weird. It was like she read his mind. After that, he was afraid to even think about anything to do with her. They talked a bit, even had some fun. The weather outside was very nice and overall, if you don't pay attention to where they're going, It looks like some kind of date night. Actually a guy. That he makes her happy, though she doesn't fully understand why she, being a girl, enjoys taking risks and being around him, because it's very dangerous. That's what attracts him to her, even though he's afraid to admit it to himself after all this time. Turns out they weren't going anywhere. It was just a walk, and Maddie only found out about it now. The guy had tricked her into taking a walk and pretended they needed to get away for a while. Thanks to the fact that she didn't know the area, she didn't pay attention to it and didn't notice when they started to head back. The smile never leaves her face, and he's so used to being around her that he's already got a little proposition for her. Maddie guesses nothing, walks into the mansion with him, already asking where to go, where her room is, and at that moment, the young man asks her to stop, and she already felt something wrong, and even got a little scared. It's actually not as scary as she thought. The Duke takes her hand and doesn't even call it an offer anymore. It's more of a condition that can't be refused. He wants to stay in the same room with her tonight. The girl can choose any of the available ones, while hinting that the most comfortable and largest is his private room, which is just nearby. Maddie was sure that since they'd agreed to sleep in separate rooms, they would, and now she didn't even know how to react to that. It's like some kind of innuendo. She knows exactly what he's trying to say, and would never believe that he'd just be scared or bored to go to sleep alone. She started to turn in a lot of questions, but he answered very short and quick. They were getting married soon anyway, so it was inevitable, and asked her to just follow him without turning anywhere. To think that while he was saying all this, the girl had managed to steal something from him and didn't even notice how it happened completely accidentally, out of habit. Surprisingly, he noticed it almost immediately, even teaching her a bit of a lesson by hinting that she was losing skills. Asked her to give back what she had taken from him immediately. And if you steal something, it is better to do it discreetly, not like a little child who wants to steal sweets from the table. Had to apologize immediately, even became a little ashamed. She could have stopped stealing a long time ago, but she cannot overcome herself. It is a habit that has developed throughout her life, and it is not as easy as it seems. She was ashamed of her act and promised that it would not happen again, because the millions she would get in a few years were much more important than some little things that could make her lose everything. And then he got the idea to check her dress. He orders to show everything she managed to embezzle that day. And as it turned out, she was stealing not only from her, but also from passing people when they were on the street. He blushed. He doesn't understand how it's possible, because she's a sweet and beautiful girl who's being spoiled by all this. And that's not all. She gives him the very contract they made. The Duke thought she was giving him her own, reminded her that it was her contract. They had agreed that everyone would have a copy, and it would be wrong for two contracts to be in the same person's possession. She replied that it was his contract. She stole it discreetly too and apologizes sincerely for it. And also, she decided to teach him something. It is very dangerous to carry such important documents on you, especially in crowded places. The boy just imagined how she could touch him so discreetly. He felt very uncomfortable, for it was too much of a... The girl is a little embarrassed too. The two of them have red cheeks, and it makes them even more awkward. He ordered to stop acting like that. It's very unusual for him. And in general, the guy can't stand all this tenderness that resembles a real relationship. It was time for a serious talk. He warned that if they were a team, they had to be honest with each other, and no stealing was out of the question. Next time, he would not forgive her, and would break the contract once and for all. She should realize this, and was surprisingly quick to agree that she was wrong, and suggested that we not revisit the topic again if we could. Made additional rules for her. 1. Never steal anything again. 2. Never destroy anyone. 3. Never run away from him. She liked the third rule the best. It sounds the most romantic, just the way she likes it. Eventually, they worked things out. They were able to compromise, and now they're in the room, and the fun part starts right now. She starts to untie her dress for some reason, untying all the knots, and he looks at it as if he can't tell if he's getting it right, so that there would be no misunderstandings. He asked her to stop and explain why she was doing this. Duke didn't expect any normal answers from her. He thought she just wanted to change and would probably ask her to turn away and not look at her. But she turned to him, smiled, and said that since he had brought her to his room deep in the night, it means getting busy and not wasting time. especially since the girl feels they both want to do it. He gets nervous, explains that he didn't call her for that, even though he probably wouldn't mind it himself. Maddie was immediately upset. He doesn't understand why the guy is reacting this way, since she took the lead and he won't even have to stress about it. It's weird. He gets more and more angry. He can't find the words, and he says he's not going to do it with a woman he feels nothing for. Asks her not to do anything stupid, to lie down quietly on the couch, and he even promised to pretend like none of this had happened. Maddie was able to get out of the situation. She pretended that she didn't have to actually do it, just enough to convince everyone else that she had, and she already had an idea how to do it. She suggests shaking the bed together to make it look like there's something going on here. It's not like anyone's going to go into the room or investigate whether they're cheating or not, right? The Duke stammered. He apologized that he had misunderstood her and seriously thought that she had originally meant to do just that and didn't mean anything real by it. They got a little tired. Lay down on the bed. She was able to ruin the moment as usual. She says how nice it is after getting sweaty to lay down on such a clean bed and get it dirty in a few seconds. Then she felt like turning on her side, resting a bit. This day had been too full and tiring. After that, they had another idea, and very timely at that. It would be strange that after all that they had done, after all those rumors, if the bed remained untouched, without a single crease, so they started crowing to make everything as plausible as possible. It was kind of fun, except that one of them was going to sleep in that bed anyway, and a special return wasn't necessary. Even though the guy has almost no mood right now, he's happy with how it went anyway. He started the right person, and now he just has to put up with her difficult character. Maddie decided to enjoy the luxurious conditions she'd only dreamed of before. The girl is lying on such a soft bed for the first time in her life, and while she is enjoying the moment, the guy is thinking about something. He wants to find some trick, some clue not to trust her, but it doesn't work. She's proven her loyalty more than once, and that's enough. He just has a habit of not trusting anyone, which isn't surprising, given the complexities of his past. He even wanted to ask a very provocative question, namely, that if she was offered a sum several times larger, even 100 times larger, would she betray him for the sake of money, or would she refuse and be faithful in spite of everything? To which she replies that she is not as bad as he thinks she is. She values agreements and her authority very much, so if she agrees on something with someone, nothing else can break the contract. Especially what could be better than cooperation with her ideal type of man, who still gives the opportunity to live in such a beautiful house and asks not to go anywhere and be always close to her. It's the most ideal conditions imaginable. If he wants to hear the answer to that question, then no, she would never, ever betray him. Of course, money is something that interests any person, but she can be trusted in this respect. And in fact, it was even a little offended that he could think that about her and ask such questions. The guy explained that she had to understand him. He couldn't help but ask that, and even got nervous. But she calmed him down in time. Not to waste time, she suggested that they should finally rest, especially as they had already discussed everything that could be. Surprisingly, despite her usual way of life before she met him, she had a very good sleep schedule. The girl rarely went to bed after midnight and was meticulous about it. She'd noticed that if she ate very late, she'd feel awful all the next day, and it was really bothering her. Also, she says that after a restless night and all that exertion, couples usually fall asleep quickly and suggest doing the same thing. Girl had put out the candles, and as it turned out, it wasn't so easy to get him to sleep. He wanted to go to sleep after her, but so did she. The guy stared at her for a while longer. He still can't believe he asked for help from the girl she is, after all, far from looking like his guards. And then he had the thought that he probably should have agreed to something right away. Now he regretted it so much, and ended up thinking all night about not reacting that way next time, especially if she offered it herself. The next day came. They got ready at the same time and went out to breakfast. And as it turned out, the menu today was the same as it had been yesterday. The Duke didn't even pay attention to it, and she didn't feel good about that piece of meat. She remembered that traitor and barely ate half of it, then handed him a note of some sort, and said that some urgent telegram had come in the morning, which she had already had time to open, when suddenly he refused to read it, but not because he wanted to ignore it, but because such things are not usually read at the table. It is impolite and contrary to all the rules of table etiquette. At the table, one should think about food and nothing else. Not happy with the rules, Mahdi was about to throw the sheet out of spite, but he reacted in time to take it back. In the meantime, I had to read the letter, and as it turned out, it was sent by the same uncle. He writes, "Dear nephew, you know how well I feel about you and want only the best for you. She is a woman of dubious reputation who has been to the police station many times, and it is not a good idea to think of marrying her. It seems to me that the late Crown Prince, your father, would say the same thing and do everything in his power to prevent this relationship. I'll come to you tomorrow at noon. It's in person. Except the thing is, the floor is literally hours away, and it's really bad. The guy's not ready for it. The first thing he does is look at his watch. He's got 2-3 hours left, and the first thing he does is rush the girl. Just her to get up immediately, get ready. They have to buy some clothes, because you can't stay like this to meet your uncle. The whole point is that they need the consent of at least 3 heads of family to get married. So now you have to do everything you can to make a good impression, even if it seems like it's going to be impossible to do so. Of course, like any other girl, Mahdi rejoiced. She shouldn't even be forced. She was already ready to update her closet, and it was probably the best order he had never given her in all the time they had known each other. She answered him, in her usual style, "How about lightening your purse a little, my dear Yuli one?" Just in case, the guy warned her that he would buy her anything she wanted, but asked her not to steal anything, otherwise she'd regret it, and in a couple years, he'd give her exactly as much less as the amount she'd stolen. Even though she promised it wouldn't happen, he still feels bad, and there's nothing he can do about it. He himself chose such a difficult girl. You just need to get used to her behavior. She is not an aristocrat after all. You need to remember where he met her and under what circumstances. Sometimes the guy himself does not understand what is so attractive in her, and he has not lived a single day without her since they met. Then he would definitely realize that he cannot live without her, as he said at the time of the proposal. As soon as they got outside, she immediately began to address him for these words, "Love, darling," and it made his eye twitch and gave him goosebumps all over his body. She's already assuring him that nothing bad will happen, that she understands how important this is, and she doesn't want to spoil anyone's mood at the beginning of the day. They're ready to leave. Maddie gets into the carriage, even keeps track of the time, when suddenly one of the assistants comes running out and asks His Highness to stop, as if something important has happened, and he must tell him about it before it is too late. He says it's better for him to stay in this place, but he hasn't said anything specific. He doesn't know what's going on. Everyone knows how he's in a hurry and that he doesn't have time for these unnecessary questions, and it's as if the aide is stalling on purpose and can't say a few words about what's wrong. The first thing he thought was that the girl had done something wrong again, and after a second, he even felt ashamed that he thought that about her. She's still in his eyes, a villain who can be expected to do bad things, and whether or not that's true will soon become clear. In that case, the Duke decides to have one of the maids go with the girl, while he says goodbye to her and comes back in a couple minutes to solve the problem, although they themselves have no idea what happened. The guy approaches her, asks her to remember all the things they've already agreed on, and not to give him any unnecessary trouble. She had already memorized everything, even listed all those rules to him, and promised him everything would be fine. The girl realizes that he just doesn't like to be rushed, and it adds up to some unpleasantness. He raised his tone a little, but she forgave him, for she would have behaved much the same way herself. In the end, she just asked him to stop nagging, trust her, and finally get away on business, since time was really short. Meanwhile, the maid who's going shopping with her has arrived, and Maddie's very glad to see her. Lastly, the Duke asked Riley to see to it that everything went off without any surprises, and of course, to return early. The sooner they get here, the more time we have to prepare for Uncle's arrival. Every minute counts. At last, they are alone. And here the gentleman asks what the aide wanted to talk to him about, and what was the reason for such secrecy. The assistant hands over the letter and says that it was sent by the emperor himself, just a short time ago, and that Uliki was even afraid to touch it. He's sure it doesn't say anything good. The emperor is not a man from whom it's pleasant to receive letters, and if they show up in the mailbox, there's usually trouble right afterward.